Good morning, afternoon or evening, wherever you are. I'm Paul Clark and welcome to my studio. So, what have I got for you lovely lot today? Well, I've been thinking it's a long time since we've done a nice seascape. So we're going to be having a go at painting this little scene. And it's something that I did recently with my local watercolour classes. They seem to enjoy it, so I thought you'd like to have a go. But just before we start, a quick announcement for those of you who follow along each week. There won't be a tutorial for 3 weeks, as tomorrow we're off to Ibiza for one of our painting retreats. We get back, then almost straight away we're off down to the New Forest for another painting retreat. So in the meantime, come and join me and we'll paint this step by step together. So there's no reference photo today because this is basically made up, but I have used several different photo resources to get some ideas. Today's materials, my paper is some Arches, it's cold press finish, £300, 100% cotton, super thick so won't need stretching, but of course any decent watercolour paper will do. And my colours today are cadmium yellow, yellow ochre, cobalt blue, alizarin crimson, phthalo blue, burnt umber and Payne's grey, and 4 brushes from my range, a large mop, 3/4 inch flat, number 12 and number 6 round. And here's the pencil sketch, and as always it's free to download from my website, link in the description below. Off we go, and using my large mop and wetting this complete sky area, including the headland here in the distance. Then straight in with my number 12 brush using cadmium yellow, leaving that little gap of white for some light bursting through. Now I've added some alizarin crimson to the yellow to create this orange. Then straight into the wet with some cobalt blue, and I've added a little touch of alizarin crimson to warm it up a bit. And I'm using the orange to create a buffer between the blue and the yellow to avoid any green appearing in the sky. In fact, when they merge you get a nice grey. And I'm dropping in here some Payne's grey, still into the wet. Lifting out here a little bit, perhaps that's a little too strong. And I've mixed Payne's grey into the cobalt blue to get some nice dark clouds here. And the key to keeping these colours bright and fresh and not mudding them up is to paint in with as few brush strokes as possible. And here I'm tilting my board to an angle of about 30 degrees just to get a little bit of movement in the paint. Now originally I wasn't going to use masking fluid because I try to avoid it if I can, but it's going to make painting around those waves so much easier if I mask out here. And I'm just using some Frisk Artist Blue mask. Now I prefer the blue to the white because you can just simply see where you've put it. So make sure your mask is totally dry, then I'm completely wetting this whole bottom area of sea. Then obviously we're going to be getting some reflection off the sky, so I'm dropping in this lovely orange colour. And then a nice soft transition into this lovely pale blue. And it's important you keep this really light and pale because this is going to be the foam. Remember, this is just the underwash with the darker details coming on top later. And it's always worth remembering that if you paint a wash too light, you can always come on top when it's dry with another layer later, but you can't make a darker wash lighter. Next for this distant headland, and I'm painting this with a really pale transparent wash of Payne's grey because I want some of that sky colour to show through behind this wash. And here just a little dab of clean water to create a soft edge and a suggestion of a little misty top. Next for the big headland, and I'm just part wetting here with some blobs of clean water, then straight in with my normal mix of cadmium yellow and cobalt blue. I have just introduced a little bit of phthalo blue as well, just to give it a bit of extra brightness. and you can see how much easier it is painting this with those big waves masked out. And I'm touching in a little bit of orange here, again just picking up some reflections from the sky. Next, a nice strong dark green straight into the wet here, and this is achieved just by using much more blue in my normal green mix. And I've just added in a little touch of Payne's Grey to give it that extra bit of darkness. Little splatting straight into the wet to give me that extra random texture and the suggestion of some vegetation. Now along the top ridge here I'm using that dark green again and getting that dry brush technique, picking up the texture of the paper to suggest these trees. And just connecting them here into the bank. And this is a sunrise or sunset scene, so you can be dark here with your colours, almost like it's a silhouette. Next, while the wash is still damp, I'm taking a plastic store card here and just scraping in the suggestion of a few trunks. Next, I'm just dropping in a few blobs of clean water to force some backruns or cauliflowers as they're known. It's a great technique for suggesting foliage and little bushes and things. Now you can see now that it's dried, those trunks are probably a little bit too white, so I'm just going to put in a really watery wash of burnt umber and using my smaller No. 6 brush. So now we need to let this totally dry, so it's a perfect time for a short break, and it's got to be a drop in the ocean, a lovely little pale ale. Next for the sea, and it's important you try and get this nice turquoisey colour. Now I'm using a mix of phthalo blue and cadmium yellow, but if you have something like cobalt turquoise, that'll work great. But for me, if I can, I like to use colours that I've already used in the painting. Just helps to keep that nice colour harmony and balance. And you can see I'm trying to create here that dry brush texture by quickly skimming my brush across the top of the texture of the paper. It's great for wave effects. But also using that conventional brush stroke with a much wetter consistency. Good round brush with a fine point is perfect for getting those thick to thin wave brush strokes. So this section of the sea is where we've got a lot of spray, so I'm looking for soft edges, so I'm re-wetting first with clean water and then dropping the colour straight in. And here those first wave washes have already dried, so I'm just coming on top for some more detail. So, letting that all dry, I'm now using my No. 6 brush and painting in the gaps some bright orange reflected off the sky. Now, I purposely didn't paint the original orange wash too strong because I knew I was going to paint these green waves on top, and that would have affected the colour and made it too dull. So now I can bring out the strength of the orange without muting the colour of the waves. Right, it's time to paint these rocks, and I'm starting with a nice watery wash of burnt umber, and I'm using my No. 12 brush, getting the painting quickly. Then switching to my No. 6 brush and dropping in some Payne's Grey straight into the wet. Next, it's the fantastic plastic card technique for painting in rocks, and I'm just scraping into the wet wash and dragging it along using the straight edge of the card. And for these bigger rocks here, I'm painting them in exactly the same way. Now, timing is very important with this technique, because if you go in while it's too wet, the colour will just creep back on itself. So you need to allow just that little bit of extra time for the paint to soak into the paper. And here I'm just being fairly careful because I want this rock to look as if it's just behind that bigger rock. Now, with this bigger rock in the foreground, I am going to be adding in some extra colours. I'm using some yellow ochre, still my burnt umber and Payne's grey. And for a bit of added interest, a little bit of cobalt blue. And these are all colours that I've used earlier. And perhaps a suggestion of some rocks or even a beach along the shoreline here. Right, so I've allowed the paint to sink into the paper for a little while, and the same technique, scratching and dragging with the straight edge. And here I'm just trying to create some sort of ridges and grooves that you sometimes see in seaside rocks. Now, I'm reckoning that these are probably igneous or metamorphic rock structures.
Don't pretend you know about rocks.
Now, what I do love about this technique is that it looks like you've spent hours painting it, when in reality it's taking a matter of seconds. And here, while it's still wet, I'm just dropping in some Payne's grey just to enhance these shadows. So now this is dried, I'm thinking the contrast between the light and the dark is just a little bit too severe. So I'm taking a very watery mix of yellow ochre and burnt umber and just painting over the complete rock. And it's very important that it's a very watery, transparent wash, because you want to see everything you've painted through it. Next, I'm using the same turquoise sea colour and just putting in a dark reflection underneath each rock. Next, for the foreground here, and what I'm trying to create is that sort of foaming, breaking waves as the water meets the shoreline. So I'm completely wetting with clean water, then dropping in that same sea colour directly in wet, as I want to start with lots of nice soft edges. And I'm changing the direction of my brush strokes to try and create that feeling of the swell of the water as it moves around. Now I've switched to my smaller brush and slightly thicker consistency, again constantly changing the angle of my brush strokes. So what's happening here is that my wash is beginning to dry, so each of these brush strokes are getting a little bit more defined and less fuzzy and out of focus, which is exactly what I'm after. So now basically that first wash has dried and I'm getting some hard detailed edges. And I'm using a lot of short dabby strokes with tapered ends. And here I'm creating a little bit of texture with a dry brush technique, just by quickly dragging my brush across the surface of the paper. So the intention here is that the lighter, whiter areas become the foam, whereas the darker areas are now the sea between, if that makes sense. So let's remove the masking fluid now, and I'm just using a rubber eraser and being very careful here. Really don't want to rip the paper, but as this is good quality arche, we should be okay. So as you can see, they look quite ridiculous at the moment, like big blobs of white mayonnaise. So what we need to do, take a damp tissue, gently rub and blend into the background, giving the impression of this nice soft spray. And it's very important you get a clean bit of tissue every time, or you're just going to be rubbing the paint into the paper. And even on the front here where the water hits the rock. And already you can see this looks so much more natural than those hard edges. Next, I'm just painting in clean water into all of these crashing waves, because I just feel that they look a little bit too white, a little bit too unnatural. So I'm just going to drop in a little bit of my orange mix, just to give that little bit of reflection off the sky. Very watery, very light. And while it's still wet, a very subtle Payne's grey shadow under each wave. Next, it's magic scalpel time, and this is one of my favourite techniques to give that little bit of extra sparkle and the suggestion of the waves crashing out. I think we could do with a few sound effects to help us along our way. Now with this technique you don't need to dig too far into the paper, just scratching off the paint off the surface. Next I'm using the Posca white ink pen, which is probably the most opaque of the white pens that I've come across, and I'm just putting in these little sparkling details. Now I could have used masking fluid to retain the white paper, but you have to admit this is a much easier method. There we go, all done, and this was a fairly detailed one, so it took me just over 3 hours. Now, reviewing this with fresh eyes the next morning, I'm thinking that these waves here are a little bit calm compared to the magnitude of the big splashy wave. So I'm just giving the sea in this area here a little bit more volume and size and movement. Yep, that should do it. I'm just beginning to overwork it. Let's leave it. Well, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did, and you'll give it a go. Just splash around literally and make some waves, have fun and enjoy the experience. And as always, make it your own. And in the meantime, please don't forget to like, subscribe if you haven't already, it is free, or leave a comment. I do read every single one, but I can't reply to them always. And I look forward to seeing you all again in three weeks' time. Take care now, everyone. Bye for now.